These are Acanthonella species. The Pacific Island tree snails in Hawaii used to number probably about 300 or 400 species. They're down to well fewer than a dozen. All of them are endangered. They have been wiped out through multiple insults, beginning with such things as the cutting down of sandalwood trees for the China trade, the cutting down of the forests for shipping, the leveling of forests for plantation agriculture, the introduction, both deliberate and non-deliberate, of predators, including 3 different species of rats, including a predatory snail that was introduced to control pests, but ended up not liking what it was supposed to eat and really liking to eat the Pacific Island tree snails. Tourists, collectors, the children of missionaries who collected these unbelievably gorgeous shells. The collections around the world in museums tell you something about the other predator, which is Homo sapiens, a direct predator, not just destroyer of habitat. Well, my friend who I promised to bring back into the story, Michael Hadfield, who is a marine biologist, ecological evolutionary developmental biology. He's one of the people who has studied how bacterial products cue the settlement of organisms onto coral reefs. He's been very interested in fouling organisms and bacterial films, and how the free-swimming larvae are cued to, not only is it time to settle down, but we have a place for you. The ways that critters of really widely different taxa require each other in order to do their lives. He's been one of the players in ecological evolutionary developmental biology in the tradition of Lynn Margulis. But in his copious free time, he has been a bulwark. He has been a fierce man for the Pacific Island tree snails and their lands and their peoples. And I have simply followed his slime trail. Okay. Michael and his colleagues, beginning in the 1970s, conducted multiple surveys on Molokai, doing capture and release of the tree snails, making tiny little marks on them and putting them back really gently, and then showing up the next year and doing the same thing, finding out that these are snails that have to be 4 or 5 years old before they reproduce, maybe make 1 or 2 babies a year, and that each tree has its own specific snails, and you can have speciation. An ohio lehua tree over here and over here and over here might have widely different snails. That's like island biogeography on ohio lehua trees. Michael did the basic biology. He used that basic biology to file the first Endangered Species Act form to try to block a highway on Oahu that was to join two major military installations, H3 on Oahu. They failed to block the highway, but they did get the Endangered Species Act designation for Pacific Island tree snails, which Michael and his colleagues have used with genius ever since, to get in the way of military free fire zones, to get in the way of further destruction, and to build alliance with Pacific Island biologists and geographers and students to somehow do a kind of partial healing. The picture over here, which is Makua Valley on Oahu, those scars that you see on these mountains, those actually aren't the scars of logging. They're really the scars set by fires from military bombing practice over a period of about 65 years. This area of Oahu was used for military bombing practice, set lots of fires. So what you're really seeing is military wounds. One of the things that Michael and his colleagues have had to do is take, it's true of much conservation biology, take remaining Pacific Island tree snails of various populations into the lab and produce conditions for them such that they can reproduce, such that they have a chance of being reintroduced to appropriate habitat, should that habitat be restored or continue to exist. So what you see, I got very interested in the material semiotics and the materialism of actually caring, okay? That what it actually takes. Collecting ohio lehua leaves every couple of weeks and making sure they got the right kind of black fungus on them, learning to culture that black fungus on agar so that you can feed your snails, keeping the temperature just so, watching the snails die because a lab manager takes over who forgets to check the temperature over a weekend and you lose most of your populations. The kind of ongoing loving and mourning and caring and working that goes into trying to make a difference. Okay? The fences that are built to keep out predators are incredibly ingenious. They build exclosures, not enclosures. The exclosures, you dig down 4 feet into the ground and you put in corrugated metal, and you have an overhang over here where you can put in little salt traps for somebody, snails who are going to climb up, the predatory snail who might climb up the fence and then fall into the salt bath and die. And you've got a little zapper electric wires run by little solar panels on the other side of the fence on a neighboring tree. And you've got barbed wire over the top to keep out human hikers. So you have a kind of multiple predator exclusion. And the biologists have this kind of A-frame that they put over the fence periodically so that they can get up and down and study the populations and see how they're doing, and then go up and down and then hide their A-frame and make sure the fences are still intact. That's what it takes, okay, to allow small populations to make it. So when Tom Van Doren asks, what is it like to live on the ledge of extinction? Extinction is a process, not an event. What does it take to hold open space for another? And what's going on in holding open this space? Well, Michael and his colleagues have hardly given up. They think that there will be further losses. They're not particularly optimistic, but they think it matters. They think they can make a difference. They think they have made a difference. And there are several ways in which that's true. So Pagan Island and the Northern Mariana Islands, after Fukushima, the slimy authorities in Saipan and the slimy authorities in Tokyo make arrangements to dump so-called low-grade nuclear waste on Pagan Island and mine the volcanic ash for agricultural use in Japan. So you bring in the ships laden with radioactive waste and you leave with ships laden with volcanic ash, and it's a win-win deal, and all you have to do is dredge the harbor and bomb turn the island into a nuclear waste dump. Michael and his colleagues stopped it. They generated a Save Pagan Island that went viral internationally very quickly. They allied with Chamorro families in the Northern Mariana Islands who still trace their ancestry to the island, whose grandparents had ranched on the island before a massive eruption caused evacuation a few decades ago, but families who have plans to move back to Pagan Island, but whether they move back only for day visits or move back to live is less the point than that this is land that is still very much in their storying of who they are in the world. Michael and his biological colleagues form alliances with these are the biogeopolitical activists over here on Pagan Island. Well, they stopped the low-grade nuclear waste, and then 3 years later, in the context of the pivot to the Pacific of the Obama administration, Pagan Island and Tinian Island are designated as a new free fire zone for the U.S. Marines, so that they would simply become target practice, both islands. But they hit a hornet's nest because the biologists and the families and the international activists were ready to move and are still moving. And I find it inspiring that these are people who really put themselves in the way of projects and win, at least sometimes. I also am very proud of Michael and his colleagues for their internship program at the University of Hawaii on the Manoa campus that has now, for about 3 decades, brought Pacific Island kids from the various islands for interning. And I have watched the picking kids up at airports, the staying with them when their grandmother dies in Palau and you can't get home, and not getting home for that is a very big deal. The kind of ongoing mentoring of folks into early professional life. And dozens of the graduates of this program work as environmental biologists and environmental policymakers and educators in the various islands of the Sea of Islands of the Pacific. Now, Michael comes from a tradition of marine biology stations, which, as all of you know, are major colonizing institutions. The marine biology stations of the Pacific were a major arm of the colonial apparatus in the Pacific, but not only, again, that these marine stations also are precious places of the cultivation of the capacities to care, of the kind of caring that builds those exclosures, the kinds of carings that connect with so that the Chamorro families and the scientists can connect with each other. So you've got Michael, who begins his biological career 45 or so years ago as a so-called pure scientist, studying the vermitid mollusks off the coast of California in the Stanford Marine Labs, in the Hopkins Marine Labs of Stanford University. A pure biologist who had no idea that politics mixed with science, who now thinks of the biogeopolitics of his science as internal to the work. It's not just something you add on in order to keep your snails alive. He understands that if you're going to understand the habitats of these human and non-human players, the technological, the human, the other plants and animals, the microbes, the people, that the biogeopolitics of science is what has to be practiced. This is a very, I mean, he's hardly a conventional person, but this is not a radical in the beginning. This is a radical now. It's not just that his wife is an activist with the Revolutionary Communist Party, which we won't go into. There are other parts of the story. But the part that I want to tell is that this is a person who, by taking the being, you have a snail has you. Well, the snail has Michael. And it's non-optional, and it's life-changing. And it causes a whole set of rethinkings of what constitutes a contact zone and what constitutes living and dying with each other well on this planet. And I end with the image of the mariposa. We're coming up to El Dia de los Muertos, the time when the butterflies of the Great Eastern Flyway are returning to the fir and oak trees of Michoacan and settling in these very few small groves that still exist for the overwintering butterflies of the Eastern Flyway. And from the point of view of the Mazahua and other both Mestizo and Indio peoples of this area of Michoacan, the returning butterflies are the returning ancestors who come back on El Dia de los Muertos in a kind of symbiogenesis. So I close my story of symbiogenesis with an opening up to something else, a symbiogenesis with mariposa in Michoacan. Thank you. It's a great mask. Sorry for the time problem, but...
Thank you so much. So what we want to do is try a little experiment. We want to ask you to spend just a minute to turn to your neighbor and talk about what you've heard. And then we're going to open things up to questions and invite you to come up to the mics on either side to ask questions in the time that remains, okay? So just a minute.
It's very lively. I'm sorry I went over time. The stories just keep coming. If I had not added extra stories, I would have been able to.
Okay. Now we invite you to come and share some of these thoughts with the rest of the group.
Okay, guys. Wow, that's amazing. I think we have a person at the microphone who wants to speak.
Okay, we're going to start with the questions now. Thank you.